So the question was, what are we talking about with this warm, hot, and cold transfer? So let's just talk about that briefly now. A warm transfer, sorry, let's start with a hot. A hot transfer is when somebody calls you, you pick up the call, and they need to talk to somebody else, but you have a lot of the information because you've been talking with them. And so it ends up to be kind of like a conference call. So they're talking to you, you're talking to the engineer because you're level one support, and there's three of you talking together. And so it's like, hello, Ahmed, thank you for calling. Yes, you have this problem, this problem, this problem. I'm just going to get Muhammad on the line. Muhammad, this is Ahmed on here. He has this problem, that problem. Ahmed starts talking. We're all start talking. We've got basically a like a video conference going, or phone or audio conference going. So that would be a warm transfer. Sorry, a hot transfer. Hot transfer, because you're transferred, but you stay on the line. A warm transfer is kind of like that. You'd guess that because warm's kind of like hot. But what it is the person calls and says, I need to talk to so and so. And you say, okay. And you get a lot of information from them. You get the other person on the line. Okay, hello, Mohammed. I got Ahmed here. Ahmed's got this problem, this problem, this problem. This is some information about it. Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Mohammed and Ahmed, you guys are okay now. I'm just going to hang up and leave you guys on there. So at that point, Ahmed and Mohammed are talking to each other. You've introduced them properly. You've passed off all the information that you have that they need. That's a warm transfer. The last type is called a cold transfer. And in the cold transfer, what happens is the person maybe knows who they want to talk to, and there's nothing that you really have to add to the conversation. So, like Ahmed calls up and says, "Look, I want to talk to Mohammed. If you got his number, you say, all right, Ahmed, let me just put you through. Mohammed, this is Ahmed. Okay, the bye." And where the other person just they already have some kind of relationship. They know what they're talking about. You're just putting them through. So there's your three: cold, warm, and hot. Are you okay with that? So that's the. I don't know. There's a lot of slides in this, right? We were talking about teams, and in particular, we just finished talking about. We just started talking about this idea of the Tuckman model. A lot of psychologists got involved in business things. We call it sort of organizational or industrial psychology. The idea being that if we can understand a little bit more about what's happening with the human mind, we can work better together as teams and in business, etc. It makes a lot of sense. And so this fellow Tuckman came up with this model. And basically, the idea of the model is that in order to have a fully performing team, that's one over here in this bottom quadrant. Uh, you guys can see this, I hope, right? So I am still sharing my screen, right? Yes. So in order to have something in that bottom quadrant, bottom left quadrant, you have to go through phases for the team to actually um, come together and to be a performing team. So the idea being that you must have a first phase, which is where the team is strongly structured by the management, I guess you could say, by the leader, who sets out very clearly what the expectations of the team are. That's a forming phase. Then there's a storming phase where people sort of bump against each other, I guess you could say. That's the concept that you guess from storming, I suppose. But basically, where they sort of drop the real politeness that would have been obvious in the forming stage, and they sort of speak their mind freely. And there's a pretty frank full and frank discussions, as we would say, where there's sharing of ideas, and it becomes a bit clear what's going to happen. After that phase, then we have this norming phase. where people start to understand exactly how the team is going to work and what is the plan and how they fit in with the team. So it resumes a bit more sort of stability as opposed to the storming phase, which can be a little bit seem a bit chaotic, though it's very, very important. And lastly, we get to the performing phase. Now, the idea is we don't actually get to the performing phase unless we've gone through the norming phase. We can't go through the norming phase unless we've gone through the storming phase, and we can't go through the storming phase unless we've gone through the performing phase. Why that's important is because the observation of Tuckman was a lot of teams, they get stuck in one of these before they get to performing. And so a lot of teams never really perform at a high level because they never properly stormed, or they never properly formed, or they never properly normed, and therefore they can never properly be a team. So that's the point that Tuckman was making, is that you need to go through the phases. And so with that understanding, we could be more effective in building teams. That's very important in an IT area, because in IT we're always working on projects, and projects will have teams which will be made by putting a bunch of people together with a bunch of different talents, and they have to work on this project for a few months, and then they disband and become another team. And so they have to go through this process a lot. And so being able to do this will make you a lot more effective in IT. And that includes in the service desk. So that's the idea of that. So we had the forming phase. After the forming phase, the norming phase, they a lot more free discussion of things. Sorry, storming. Norming phase, as we said, people are feel where they're actually are part of a team. They feel a bit of camaraderie. There's a bit of a team spirit, and the team leader is able to sort of step away a bit, and people kind of work on their own. Finally, we get to this performing phase, where things are sort of humming along, sort of almost mechanically, I guess you would say. People feel pride and satisfaction. They are a community, and there's cooperation and collaboration at that point. But the important thing there is you don't get there unless you go through the other phases. Um, as it says, some teams just never make it to the performing phase because they get stuck. They don't know how to manage conflict. Okay, they're not able to come to consensus. Consensus doesn't mean that we agree on everything 100%. It means that we agree that this is the way we're going to go at this particular point in time. Um, and there may be conflict in a team. We expect that. And I think we got a couple of slides on that. But the idea being that conflict has negative connotations in the word, and that's probably because a lot of people don't really know how to handle conflict. Conflict is inevitable, and the idea is not to avoid it or to run toward it, but the idea is to know how to handle it properly. And so that's what this slide is about, is the fact that we can be constructive or destructive in the way that we manage conflict when conflict arises. We could be kind of to the point where we just avoid conflict at all. And the problem with that is we see that that might surprise you, that avoiding all conflict actually is destructive, because it could lead to the fact that every time we come to a situation which is a bit conflicting, we just give up, and that's destructive because our point of view is destroyed at that point, and so that's not good. That would be a destructive form of managing conflict, as opposed to when we're faced with conflict, we step back a bit, we think, and we adapt, and we respond after thinking. That's a constructive way of handling it, which is a bit what we call passive. Now, active ways of being constructive or destructive, we could take perspectives, create solutions, reach out. Notice that that's in this top left corner. This is this is where we want to be. We don't want to be in these other places. Well, we want to be up in one of these two. So depending on whether we can be active or passive, we want to, yeah, this is probably the best one. This one is also important at some points. But we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this other one either, which is a sort of the headbutting one, right? You know, where every time we see a possibility of a conflict, we go, hey, awesome, let's go butt heads, right? Yeah, we're gonna win because we're the loudest and we're this whatever. The problem with that is that's destructive to other points of view and totally overall is destructive as well. So when there's a conflict, it has to be addressed. It can't be avoided, and it can't be sort of bulldozed over if we're going to be effective in the team. So we need to talk about our conflicts. People be honest. It's not pleasant sometimes. That's why people avoid it, but it still needs to be um, done. We need to engage it. And that's shown in this diagram. The important thing in this diagram that I hope that you notice is that there is quite a possibility of being stuck in a circle. And if you look at that circle, what it is, there's conflict, and then we're angry, but we then avoid and then we come back to our conflict and we're just stuck in there. All right. Or another thing that happens is there's conflict, and then we try to dominate. We try and dominate the conflict, which is sort of so we got these two bad things happening here: avoiding the conflict and dominating conflict, and then we're stuck in this circle. The only way to get out of the cycle is to actually resolve it, and that's going to require some kind of communication where we put out our particular concerns and we listen to the other particular concerns, and then we resolve the conflict. Sorry, I got some weird stuff going on here. Uh, yeah. Oh, because there's links. Um, have you ever had a situation where you're talking to somebody and it is a conflict disagreement, and the other person just keeps on saying the same stuff over and over again? I don't know if you've ever been in that situation. I certainly have. And I have to admit, before I sort of read a bit about this, I used to think, well, the person's saying the same thing over and over again. What are they? Man, are they sort of cognitively impaired or something? What do they think I'm stupid or something? Why do they have to keep saying the same thing over and over again? And what I come to understand is this is a psychological sort of issue. It's not a matter of being smart or dumb or anything like that. It's about the fact that, and it goes back to our very first lecture, if you don't feel that the other person is understanding, and we mean that sort of at every level, like emotional level as well as the sort of reality level. If you don't feel you're being understood, then you're likely to sort of do this repeating sort of thing. And so if the person keeps repeating themselves in there and repeating their claims or their objections or their grievances, that means that it's probably a cue to us to stop talking and sort of listen a bit and try and sort of communicate to them that you're trying to understand them. Once they get that they feel that you're trying to understand them, probably they'll stop repeating themselves. But if you don't try and understand them, you're not going to get anywhere at that point. So yeah, but so we don't need to do that either. We don't need to sort of be repeating ourselves over and over again. And but we do need to sort of try to communicate. Now, here's some important things there about discussing and debating the past. Well, let's just leave that, right? There's some things came to mind, but I didn't want to sort of say them. Uh, um, let's just leave that. Speaking of the past, I really like this diagram here, image. A meme. I guess you'd call that a meme, wouldn't you? It's okay to change your mind. Now, why is this one so cool? Because that image actually is supposed to represent this animal that died out, extinct millions of years ago, which is called the iguanodon. And the thing about the iguanodon is that they found a bunch of fossil bones of this animal. They never really, originally, they never found an intact skeleton. They just found bits of it. And so they found skull and they found this thing here. And at first, they thought that this thing here was like a horn, like a rhinoceros, right? They had this thing. So the drawings they had of this animal, the iguanodon, they had this rhino horn sticking out of its nose, right? Because that's how they thought it was. Because that's the way it is with fossils, right? There's just bits lying around the bit, and you have to sort of try and figure out how they fit it together. But then they did find a complete skeleton at one point, and they found out later that the this bone here was actually like a claw, and they had to rethink what they understood about that particular animal. So that's what. So the scientists had to change their mind when a little bit of new information came along. We should be able to change our mind as well. That's really quite an important thing, Um, what I've come to understand is a lot of the time you may think 100% I'm right and 100% they're wrong, and then you'll find that you know what? Hey, maybe it's not 100%. Maybe it's even the other way, or maybe it's just 50-50. Um, so can we work as teams? In some ways, that's a lot harder than working on your own. And mostly because people are just kind of a bit hard to understand a little bit. And so there's all kinds of opportunities for sort of misunderstanding, which can lead to sort of difficulties. So, how do we work in a team? Can we work in a team not by just sort of giving up all of our ideas, but by putting our ideas with the team in a way that sort of helps everybody, including ourselves and the others in the team? So there's a lot of skills that might be required, helpful there, and some of those are here. Being honest, appreciating other people and their different styles, avoiding politics. We could talk a long time about politics, and you might say, well, we don't have any politics. We're not talking about politics like, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It's not that kind of politics. What we're talking about is politics in a company. So basically, the idea is if you get three people together working in an organization, two of them will sit aside at some point and try and work out how to advance themselves against the third. That's politics. So basically, it's just small groups of people banding together, small or large groups of people banding together to advance their own personal agendas. Happens a lot. Happens in every business. Every business I've been in, that happens. And usually businesses have some rules to sort of keep that manageable. But what I'm going to say to you is, when you go out to work, you're going to find that, and so you just have to accept that that's life, right? There's going to be politics. So you could sort of say, well, I'm not going to get involved in that. All right. Well, then you're never going to be in management or anything like that, because that's going to be there. So you have to sort of figure out how you sort of um, look at that. But certainly we want to try and avoid the political side of thing, and just work within the rules as much as we can. So the psychology, coming back to the psychologists, they're always talking about different things. Putting psychologists like to think of themselves as scientists. So there's some controversy about that, I suppose. But uh, so what they like to do, as considering themselves as scientists, is categorize things, just like we categorize different animals and plants, like to categorize different behaviors in people. And they actually come up with sort of a 5 different areas of human personality traits, they call them, and you could call these a spectrum, right? And so based on these, and here it actually has a different number, but the psychologists actually refer to the big 5, and there's everybody supposedly is found somewhere on this line that we call a spectrum, on each of those big 5 sort of personality traits. And there's sort of openness and conservatives values, these types of things, um, to do with orderliness, and yeah, they're all sort of personality traits as it is. So that's a thing, right? We are different in that. But that means that we have different things to offer a team. Our personality traits could be very, very useful in a team. So one of the other ones I mentioned, there's like these big five personality traits. So one of them you probably heard of is we have extroversion and introversion, right? So we have a certain personality trait, whereas people like to um, be alone. They recharge in their solitude, right? They like that. Well, there's other people that are always seeking to be surrounded by a group, and so we'd say that's extrovert. And the extroverts are pretty obvious to see, right? They talk a lot and they have a lot of people around them all the time. And the introverts are out reading a book somewhere, right? Now, the thing is that nobody's no, I shouldn't say nobody uh, we it's not like half the people are all reading books and half the people are just out there sort of jumping around partying all the time. Most of us are somewhere in between, right? And sometimes we might be a bit like that and sometimes we might be a bit like the other, but we're somewhere in between. But if we understand one of those we favor, and you can know that. So let's talk about introversion, because perhaps that's the easiest one to understand. And you'll know that because if you go to a party and you're at the party and after like about an hour you start looking at the door, you enjoyed yourself at the party, you said hello to a few people, and you talked to a couple of people, and then after about like 10 after about an hour you're looking at the door and you're looking for some excuse to leave. You're probably an introvert. All right. And you get home and you relax and you go, oh, I'm glad I'm home. And you pull out a book, right? You're an introvert. On the other hand, if you're the person who during COVID-19, they locked you down and you couldn't go out and see anybody and you started pulling your hair out because, oh my God, I'm here by myself, then you're probably an extrovert. So yeah. Now, how does that? Why is that important? These are different personalities. I'm not saying one's good, one's bad. I'm just saying they're different. And if we sort of understand that about ourselves and others, we can realize that we have these different. They're all just strengths, really. And how can we use them to um, to work together? All right, so here's some styles. Now, this is not personality types, but this is styles that have been sort of discussed. And we got five of those. Four. Challenger, which is devil's advocate. So that's kind of now we're talking about introvert. That's kind of that kind of thing. It's kind of a thoughtful thing. The collaborator is the person who wants to work with other people and work towards goals. The communicator and the contributor. Now notice this is just like a nice little scheme that somebody made up using a lot of words that starts with C. But yeah. What we got here is a nice little diagram also, which sort of relates those personality types, or sorry, they're not personality types, they're leadership styles, I guess you could say, relating them to the different phases in the Tuckman model. Um, and so what this is saying is during the forming phase, it's if we have a challenger personality, we set side, that's the person that we want to push to the front. Their leadership style is required in the forming phase. During the storming stage, where people are sort of talking to each other about their different ideas, the person that we want to push to the front for their leadership style is a communicator. All right, during the norming phase, we want to push the contributor to the front. And during the performing phase, we want to push the collaborator to the front. Now, in this diagram, it talks about how the teams work in each of those phases. And there's one extra phase which is added, which is kind of nice because, especially talking about teams in IT, we create a team, couple of months, work on a project. At the end, we finish the project. We take the team apart and we start again. And that's this extra phase that has been added there, which is called adjourning. Um, so yeah, the team players kind of need to work together, as it says, not dominate over time. Sometimes we do need to have that kind of dominant personality at the start, we noticed, but over time through the team, we actually need to have people step back a bit and sort of be sensitive to other people in the team. And yeah, okay, so I don't know about emotional intelligence. The idea there, I think, is that if we understand these things that I've been talking to you about, personality is very much related with the emotions, I suppose. And if we understand ourselves and other people a little bit, then we're able to sort of be more effective in that self-awareness. So if we are aware of our um, personalities, I'll say that, then we understand that our behavior does affect other people, and we're able to sort of control it in a way that is positive for other people. Diversity, I hope you get the idea there. The point that I was trying to make there, and diversity's here about that, is that the different styles, we're not saying one is better than the other. We're just saying that one comes forward at different phases in the forming of the team, and yeah, actually all of those different personality styles are useful. Okay. So the point here is that you are a team in the service desk, but that service desk also is part of a bigger team. And so just like we have to work on our team relationships inside the service desk, we have to work on team relationships with people outside the service desk. So the service desk itself is a part of a larger team. Now, the idea here in this diagram, and that I'm trying to get across here, is we all have our own individual goals and individual motivations. And what we try and do in a team